Our top story of this hour, the war in Ukraine is now in its 8th month and the threat of a nuclear war seems to be growing by the day. Russia today rehearsed its response to a nuclear attack. Russia's exercise involved nuclear submarines, strategic bombers and ballistic missiles, and the country's president, Vladimir Putin, remotely observed the exercise called Grom or Thunder. Through these exercises, Russia uses test launchers to put Moscow's nuclear forces through their paces. In a show of force designed to deter and intimidate enemies, the exercises come after Putin expressed his readiness to use all means available to fend off attacks on his country. The Russian defense minister says the exercises practiced delivering a massive nuclear strike by strategic offensive forces in response to an enemy nuclear strike. Such drills involving land, sea and air components of the Russian nuclear triad are conducted annually to train the country's nuclear forces and demonstrate their readiness. Later, in a meeting of intelligence officials from ex-Soviet countries, Putin said the potential for a conflict in the world and in the region remains high. These alarming developments come at a time when tensions are high over a dirty bomb allegation that Moscow has made against Kiev. Kiev has maintained that there is no evidence to back Moscow's charge and that the warning looks like it's designed to escalate tensions around the war in Ukraine or just to serve as justification for some kind of Russian battlefield escalation. The West, too, has dismissed Russia's allegations.
Russia now falsely claims Ukraine is preparing to use a radiological dirty bomb on its own territory. NATO allies reject this transparently false allegation.
But the Kremlin has not stopped pushing this allegation. Earlier today, the Russian defense minister, in separate calls, spoke to his Chinese and Indian counterparts, reiterating the dirty bomb allegation against Ukraine, calling it a provocation. The dirty bomb saga also reached the United Nations. The Security Council discussed the claims at a closed-door meeting. So, what exactly is a dirty bomb? These are detonative devices with radioactive material in them. They're not sophisticated devices. They're much easier and cheaper to build than a nuclear device. When it comes to damage, dirty bombs are far less lethal compared to a nuclear bomb explosion. But a dirty bomb could expose broad areas to radioactive contamination. So it is a psychological tool with the aim to create panic. For more on this, we are now joined by Peter Kleppe from Brussels. He's a political analyst and the editor-in-chief of Brussels Report. Mr. Kleppe, thanks very much for joining WION. Now, Vladimir Putin keeps saying that there is plenty of scope for an escalation of the conflict. He keeps talking about the possibility of a nuclear conflict. Today, we saw Russia holding these exercises, rehearsing its so-called response to a possible nuclear attack. The question really is, what is going on here? How should these developments be read? Is this nuclear saber-rattling by Putin? Or are we really staring at a serious danger of matters escalating here?
At least Ukraine is quite worried about all this. Like everybody else, they don't really know what to make of this. Russia is accusing Ukraine of committing some kind of a dirty nuclear attack on its own territory. So it sort of doesn't entirely make sense. Also, according to experts, Ukraine does not even dispose of the material needed to do such an attack, if that were necessary. Then we see how Russia is also providing some of its military with like protection gear that is useful in the case of nuclear attacks. So I would say the consensus is that Moscow and Russia is not planning any nuclear attack, or not even planning any sort of false flag attack, basically doing something and then blaming it on Ukraine. Sort of the consensus is that this is Putin trying to instigate fear, trying to, find new ways of basically saying the same, telling people, look, never forget that I have a nuclear bomb, so please, take me serious. And in that sense, it's a sign of weakness, because on the actual battlefield, Russia is not having a lot of success.
Okay, it's very interesting. You see it as a sign of weakness on part of Russia, which, as we know, has suffered multiple reverses on the battlefield in recent weeks. You're saying Putin is trying to remind the West, I have a bomb, take me seriously. So it may well be nuclear saber rattling. However, talking specifically about that dirty bomb allegation. Now, Russia seems to be escalating this at all levels. They've taken it up at the United Nations. Ministers are talking about it with other countries. For example, India's defense minister today had a phone conversation about this very issue. It is an allegation that both Kiev and the West have dismissed. But interestingly and significantly, Ukraine believes that this could be Putin's way of preparing the grounds for some sort of a provocation or further escalation. Do you see it as that?
Look, at least it's a scenario we should not dismiss. I think we have to be modest. Sort of the scenario that I described is, I think, what most people think is most likely. But at the end of the day, more pessimistic scenarios are definitely conceivable. You never know if internally Putin is under such pressure that he feels he needs to sort of escalate the conflict, not only drag it out, but escalate it, in order to drag attention away from his personal position in Moscow. So that's definitely not something that we should dismiss out of hand, something like that. So imagine indeed if he sort of, if some dirty nuclear attack takes place, that of course has the chance to dramatically escalate the situation. What the United States has said is that if Russia were to commit any nuclear attack, and that includes also a false flag attack, with basically Russia denying it has committed it, but all evidence pointing at the Kremlin. So the United States has said, look, if you do that, we will not launch a nuclear counterattack, but we will launch a conventional counterattack. So in such a scenario, it's no longer excluded that the United States targets Russian troops in Ukraine, and according to some sources, even on Russian territory proper. So that would, of course, carry enormous risks. It remains a very unlikely scenario. But like I said, there could be a perfect storm with Putin trying to cling on to power in a clumsy way by escalating it in this way, and the United States aggressively reacting. So we should not rule this out, even if it remains, thankfully, a very unlikely scenario.
Even if it's an unlikely scenario, it is very clear, as you pointed out, that there seems to be display of aggression all around. The United States has warned Moscow of dire consequences if it were to go ahead and use any kind of nuclear weapons against Ukraine. And therefore, whichever way you look at it, in view of the latest developments, it does seem like a de-escalation of tensions in the region is very, very unlikely anytime in the near future. But Mr. Klepi, thanks very much for speaking to WION and sharing your perspective with us on that story.